Coming up on Kentucky Outlook, more than 1,000 Kentuckians die needlessly every year as a result of drug overdoses. Whereas accidental drug overdose deaths have become an epidemic across the world and especially in Kentucky, Governor Steve Beshear has declared August 31st as International Drug Overdose Awareness Day. Well, with talk of drug cartels in the Commonwealth, constant meth lab busting, and prescription drug abuse a real issue, we're going to talk about that next on Kentucky Outlook. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to Kentucky Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. It's odd to say the word drug cartel and equate it to the state of Kentucky, but it's a reality, as is crystal meth and drug abuse. We're waging a noble battle to fight drug abuse in Kentucky, but how are we faring? We're going to find out as we welcome to the program two individuals in the know. Now, I like to call both of you, I call you the Drug Czar, but you're saying he's the real Drug Czar. He's the state guy. But Tommy Loving joins us. He's with the Warren County Drug Task Force. In addition, we are joined by Van Ingram, who is, now I want to get this right, he's with the Kentucky Office of Drug Control Policy. So you're making policy, you're writing the laws, you're looking at those kind of things, you're in the trenches. You're busting these bad guys. So let's talk a little bit about that. In particular, we noted that Governor Steve Beshear has named August 31st as International Drug Awareness. Why do we need to have a day to recognize that?
You know, so many times these are looking at as the forgotten deaths. You know, drug overdose deaths just doesn't affect the person. It affects their family. It affects their community. And it's so needless and it's so unnecessary. These are deaths we can prevent. And we recognize this year International Drug Overdose Awareness Day. This is a thing that started in Australia, and they've been promoting it for a number of years. And just today, the Office of National Drug Control Policy came out with a proclamation, and Governor Beshear put one out yesterday because it is a big concern to him. It's a big concern to this administration. We've taken a lot of steps to try to reduce that number. I'm proud to say that it has gone down a little bit, not near enough, but after a decade of watching this number increase every year, to see it level off and start to decline is encouraging to me.
Well, it's light at the end of the tunnel to a certain extent. So let's talk about, you know, I mentioned drug cartels, and I always kind of, in the back of my head, I kind of go, what? In Kentucky? So let's take a look at what is the drug of choice right now in the Commonwealth?
All of the above.
Really?
We have issues, I think, in Warren County, and it does vary across the state, but, you know, we're beginning to see a little bit of heroin, which is very troubling. We still have meth labs. They've been reduced about 15%. Of course, we've talked before that we have a solution to reduce those by 95%.
Which would be?
Which would be scheduling Sudafed or making it a prescription drug. But when we're battling the drug companies that spend over $500,000 in lobbying in Frankfort, and you've got about a dozen cops with no money, it's predictable who's going to win, and they won. But we are down a little bit because they did tighten the regulation that once you reach 24 grams, then you do have to get a prescription. So we attribute that to about an 18% decrease this year. And as Van just addressed, the fact we'd been going up 15 to 20% a year, then that's a positive.
That's encouraging.
But it's still very discouraging to us, the fact we have a solution that's proven to work, the only proven solution that's reduced meth labs in Mississippi and Oregon by 95%, and it's a very simple solution with not nearly as much inconvenience for people as the drug companies would have you believe.
Well, we're going to talk about House Bill 1. I want to save that for the second segment, but you're telling me that as it stands in the, you know, drugs of choice, all of the above, but we're seeing suddenly heroin entering the Commonwealth.
That's the new picture, and Van can probably address that more because we're just beginning to see it in Warren County. But it's at epidemic proportions in northern Kentucky, Louisville, and Lexington, and I think he's probably better versed
Epidemic?
on that.
Now that's a big word. epidemic
It is a big
proportions?
word. And to go back to your original question, Barb, when people ask me, and they do all the time, what's our worst drug problem in Kentucky? I always have the standard answer of tell me what county you're standing in, and then I'll tell you.
Okay.
Because we're so diverse. And so many communities have been devastated by meth where some have never seen it. So many communities have been devastated by prescription drugs where it's not been an issue until recently for many places. But on to heroin. Heroin has been an issue in our northern Kentucky region for some time.
Now, why is that?
Its proximity to Cincinnati, which has always been a town that trafficked in a lot of heroin.
Okay.
But really what we have in this state is an opioid problem. Heroin is the same opiate as is Percodan, as is Percocet, as is OxyContin, as is Lortab. Pharmacologically, these things are not that much different. The heroin you buy on the street is not that much different than the pill you're taking for your back pain. So we have an opiate problem. And what's been done to combat that? Well, OxyContin, Purdue Pharma, the manufacturer of OxyContin, in 2010 took their long-acting drug, it was a 12-hour pill, and made it difficult, if not impossible, to break that down into a crushable or dissolvable form and for IV drug use.
Which is how many of these drug users get it. Okay.
So when they did that, we started to see an increase in heroin. A year later, a drug called Opana, which is oxymorphone, which became another drug of choice, they changed their formulation. There again, we saw another spike in heroin. And then, as we'll talk about later, along comes a clampdown on prescription drugs statewide, and we see a continued increase in heroin. So all these things kind of lead to that, because if you look at the abuse of any substance, four things are generally have to occur, or four things factor in, and they are price, availability, the perception of risk, and public attitude.
Whoa, hang on. The perception of risk, in other words, if it's going to be easy, I'm not going to get in trouble, not a problem? Or they liked the risk?
No. One of the reasons the prescription drug epidemic has become as big as it is so many people said, oh, this is from a doctor, it can't hurt you.
Is that what you get to on the street in Warren County?
Yeah, I think that people have that perception in Warren County that, you know, the pills are medically
it's okay
prescribed.
because a doctor
Yes.
prescribed it.
And, you know, and certainly they have quality control, but the problem is you're taking it inappropriately, and you're not having a doctor prescribe your dosage, so that's where we wind up with overdoses and improper use, and so many of these people have no legitimate use for it. It's just they're addicted to it. And
then we go back to the perception of risk with heroin. People of our age group, this was the last drug we would have ever thought about trying.
Exactly.
We heard those messages loud and clear that this was too dangerous. This was a road you didn't want to go down. It's unfortunate, but young people today didn't get that memo, because we really haven't been talking about heroin much in this society because it's not been a problem until recently. This was a predictable problem. As we saw the increase in opiates and the appetite for opiates increase, it was only a matter of time before a more cheap and available form, an illicit form, heroin, became available.
A more cheap and accessible. We're going to talk about that and House Bill 1 in the state of Kentucky. Did it make a difference? We're going to find out when Kentucky Outlook continues as we talk more about the drug war in the state of Kentucky. Stay with us. Kentucky Outlook continues. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us. We come to you every week and bring you what's happening in your region. We're looking out for you on Kentucky Outlook. Now, today we're talking about the drug war in Kentucky, and I went so far as, you know, I thought really hard about, do I want to say drug war? But it's a war. It's an ongoing battle, and you're in the trenches. We're welcoming back for our second segment Van Ingram and Tommy Loving, who are out there in the trenches. You're helping to write the policies. Before the break, you were talking about four things that are needed to get to that place. Recap that.
And what we were saying, Barbara, is when you look at the abuse of a substance, there are always four factors that go into that, and that is price. Is it affordable? Availability. Is it available? Perception of risk. Do I feel like do I recognize the risks associated with this, or do I downplay it? And finally, is the public attitudes. We're all influenced by our peers and by others as to the things that we do. So when those things line up together, or two or three of those things line up together, we'll see the abuse of a substance start to increase.
And as we mentioned before the break, one of the substances that we're seeing an increase in the abuse of is heroin, which, as you were mentioning, our cohort, when we were growing, like, heroin? You know, that's like, but they didn't get the memo, and I'm quoting you, the current generation that's abusing this substance.
Sure, you know, we've been in operation in Warren County for 16, almost 17 years now as the Drug Task Force, and up until this year, we hadn't made a heroin case for trafficking in heroin at all. So the perception hasn't been out there to the younger generations, younger than us, which are a lot of people, but of how bad this stuff really is.
And how bad this stuff really is. So we bring in, you said it was inevitable that we were going to get to this place because so much of it has to do with availability. Let's take a look at House Bill 1 and help us understand what that is, what it was, and what it had hoped to do.
Yeah, House Bill 1 is a big piece of legislation that has a lot of moving parts to it. But the overall goal of it was, and is, to change the way we look at prescription painkillers, opiates, in this state, and in this country, really. We've downplayed their dangers for years. We went for years and didn't recognize the addictive nature of these drugs and how they interact with other substances and the risk of overdose and death. So we want it to be a measured, reasoned decision that every time a prescriber prescribes an opiate, that they've discussed this with the patient, they've talked about the risk versus the rewards, and decided on this as a proper course of treatment. Not a cavalier decision, but a very measured, conscious, deliberate decision. And House Bill 1 did a number of things to help foster that. One of the things it does is it required all prescribers in Kentucky to have an account with our prescription monitoring program, CASPR. Now that program, if I go into that program as your physician and put in your name and date of birth and address, it will tell me your controlled substance history. And I may find out that the controlled substance you're seeking from me, you're also getting from 2 other people.
Right, the red flag goes up, this person might be an abuser.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If you've lied to me and said, no, I've never taken Loratab before, and now I read in your CASPR, yes, you have. These kind of red flags. Well, prior to House Bill 1, only about 28% of the prescribers in Kentucky had a CASPR account, let alone used it. House Bill 1 set out to change that, and it has. We now have nearly 100% compliance with prescribers, and they are running these reports. We've went from, we're on pace to have over 4.5 million reports this year.
Wow, and you brought some statistics that just taking a look at how things have changed since the implementation of House Bill 1.
Yeah, if you look at House Bill, the 12 months prior to House Bill 1, and then look at the 12 months post House Bill 1, we've seen prescriptions for oxycodone, those are your Schedule II drugs like Percodan and OxyContin and those type of drugs, drop 11%. The hydrocodone, the drugs like Loratab, Vicodin, dropped over 10%. Oxymorphone, the Opana drug I spoke of, have dropped 35%.
So it is really making a difference.
We're prescribing these drugs less, and after a decade again of seeing these numbers go up every quarter, and I've been watching these numbers for a decade, every quarter we would prescribe more of these substances in Kentucky than we did the quarter before that.
But I've got to ask this question. Is it not logical that if they can't get those drugs, then guess what? They're going to go find something else that meets all those 4 requirements.
It is logical.
Yeah.
But I think there's another component too with House Bill 1 that from our law enforcement stance or point that we hope happens. When that physician identifies their existing or new patient is addicted to opiates, then we hope they can get them some help, get them treatment for their addiction before they come in the criminal justice system, because we're not out here to arrest users. We're here, our purpose is to arrest traffickers. So the more users that can get in treatment, get better, that's good for them. It doesn't clog up the criminal justice system, and hopefully over time might even reduce some trafficking.
Well, and are they getting the help is the big question.
Well, certainly treatment admissions continue to rise, but capacity is and will be a problem for some time. But Tommy hits the nail on the head. Opiate addiction is a disease. It's a brain disease process. And we've been diagnosing it far too much in the criminal justice system as opposed to in medical settings. We want to see it diagnosed more and treated more in a medical setting than in a criminal justice system.
You know,
Now, with that said,
yeah.
if you go out here and sell it, we're going to try our hardest to get you in the
We're gonna
criminal
get you.
justice.
Yes.
But if you're using it and addicted to it, then we want to see you get help
yeah,
and not
that's a
keep
good point.
going through the revolving door.
Speaking of the revolving door, you know, there was a time, probably 20 years ago, when talk of cartels and the Colombian drug cartel was very strong. But we're hearing that again. So, as I mentioned, we actually have cartels actively working in Kentucky?
Here in Bowling Green, we've tied two of our previous cases that are resolved now that at the supply level, we had people actually driving out and dealing with cartel lieutenants in Tucson, bringing thousands of pounds of marijuana back to be distributed here. So yes, there's some other things we hear that we probably can't discuss in this setting, but there is a presence. They have their tentacles out there in Kentucky and in probably every state in the country.
So, that having been said, information-wise, you know, we live in a more techno-savvy society, and are we making a dent because of that? Are we better able to find these traffickers, to find those tentacles and cut them?
There's several things that help us in our enforcement efforts, again, that I can't go into, that weren't available to us 15 years ago.
Okay.
A lot of the things, the way we do business has changed over time and made us more efficient and effective. But again, it's not something I feel comfortable. We can't give away our trade
but
secrets.
Those, of course
Yeah.
not, but those tools are there.
Yeah.
Now, you for years were in the trenches, and for the last decade or so have been working as a policymaker and working in the drug policy office. That, you know, writing the laws and helping people who are in the trenches. Do you feel like you've got what you need in that regard?
Yeah, we have enjoyed a great support and cooperation with the Kentucky General Assembly since this office started in 2004. When we come to the legislature with an idea of what we think we need, you know, we're usually successful. So yeah, we're getting the support we need. But it's a huge problem, and it's not going to be, we can't look for huge victories. We celebrate the small victories.
Do those little victory dances, right?
What
about meth labs? You know, we're quickly running out of time. We hear so much about, you know, it's not unusual to pick up a newspaper or listen to a news reporter here tweeted that, you know, yes, we busted another meth lab. So those are still very much alive and well.
We had two here in Bowling Green this past weekend.
Just this
that
past weekend.
Our guys had to come out and assist other agencies.
What if you're a viewer, you're watching this show and you think, you know, I was down at the lake the other day and I saw this suspicious. What can we do as citizens to pay attention?
Well, the predominant meth lab we're dealing with now is called the One Step. So it's in a 1 or 2 liter bottle. I'm trying not to call brand names.
Right.
Plastic drink bottles. We don't want to incriminate different beverage companies.
there you
They
go.
just use their throwaways. But if you see something like that and it's bubbling, or if you see a plastic drink bottle that has a tube running out of it, we'll call the police.
Don't touch it.
Don't touch it. Stay away from it. It could explode. It could have hydrochloric gas coming from it. So just stay away from it as a safety issue and call the police. And someone will come look at it. And if they determine it's a meth lab, then someone from our task force or another will come deal with it.
Good to know, good to know. So really pay attention.
Correct.
Pay attention is the key. We're just about out of time, Van. Leave us with some words of wisdom.
Well, we're going to keep fighting the good fight. We're going to keep pushing for things. You know, if we can drop overdose deaths, we've dropped meth labs, 300 labs this year, so far this year, as opposed to the same time frame last year. So we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep doing the things we think will make a difference. and we're going to keep doing those small victory dances.
There you go. We're doing a lot of dancing here. We've been talking with Van Ingram, who's representing the Kentucky Office of Drug Control Policy, and the guy I like to call the Warren County Drug Czar. That would be Tommy Loving, representing the Warren County Drug Task Force. And when we come back, you want to talk about a fight? Let's talk about 50 years later. As we speak, we are celebrating the March on Washington. We're going to talk more and see where we've come in race relations with Dr. Sandra Ardrey when Kentucky Outlook continues. Stay with us. Kentucky Outlook continues. I'm Barbara Deeb. Well, as we speak in our nation's capital, they are remembering how 50 years ago there was something very historic that took place. It was called the March on Washington. To recollect, to reminisce, and to see how far we still need to go, we welcome to the program Dr. Sandra Ardrey. It's good to have you back. Haven't seen you in a while. You know, you told, before we get started, I think everyone who was alive at that time, or even as we look back, has some sort of thought that goes in their head or recollection, but you have a beautiful story to share. Tell that.
Yes, 2 years ago, my daughter and I represented the university at the dedication of the Martin Luther King Center, the Martin Luther King Monument in D.C. And as I was sitting there with my daughter, 2011, here's this African-American family, President of the United States, black man, black family, and then I look in the background and there's also the Washington Monument. And I remember that in 1963, when I was 10 years old, I went on vacation and my family was in D.C. and I wanted to ride the elevator up to the top, and they wouldn't let me. And they said, Negroes can't ride the elevator. And I thought, well, okay. And, I just walked up. But then as I was sitting there, all that time later with my daughter, and it was almost affirmation that I really was a part of the dream. So that it was great, a great memory.
Wow, and and what I didn't mention, you are head of the political science department at Western Kentucky University. So looking back from then to
Yes.
here to see, look how far I've come.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you also mentioned today is a monumental day in the school systems.
Yes,
in the
if
Warren
I'm not mistaken, I believe it was 50 years ago today that the Bowling Green public school systems integrated. And so August 28, 1963, for them also was a good day.
Beautiful. If you're listening to anything or watching anything as people are remembering 50 years ago, and let's just take a little look back at what we were looking at, because as historians, it's always so much clearer in hindsight. Yes. But how did it all begin in '63? They decided, okay, we're going to descend on Washington. What prompted all of that?
Well, the civil rights movement had been going on for several years. There were several marches and demonstrations, sit-ins, riots, all kinds of civil disobedience going on. And one of the strategies to bring national attention to some of the goals of the civil rights movement, which was simply equality, social equality, racial equality, economic equality, those kinds of things. But to bring some type of national attention to all of that, there was the decision to come together in 1963 and have this March on Washington at the Lincoln Memorial, which is in itself historic. And so no one realized what that actually meant and how many people would actually show up. But as you said, there's a sea of humanity.
Well, yeah, I've heard that term so much today because, that one gentleman who was the youngest speaker there at that time, all those years ago, he was recollecting how he looked out at that sea of humanity, 250,000 plus people. Think about that number and think about getting all those people rallied to come together to say, you know what, I'm going to leave my job today and I'm just going to go to D.C.
Well, Martin Luther King started his march in the deep, deep South and marched for months all through the summer to get to that place in August. And as he went, I remember he came through Raleigh, North Carolina, where I was from, again, 10 years old, and he would come through and he would stay at the churches, and the churches would gather, and Martin Luther King is coming, and we've got to have a great presentation, we've got to do this, to that. And so he was able to stay in the churches as he made his way up into D.C. area. And as he left a place, he would always take that contingency of people from that area. And so they all converged in D.C.
So, what was it about him that made him such an amazing leader? What made him that guy that people wanted to follow? Was it timing? Was it?
Well, most social movements have a charismatic figure, a great orator, and he was all those things. He was young, he was energetic, he was charismatic, he had the gift of gab, so to speak, and so it was almost natural that we needed someone. He was the drum major of time, and we just needed that.
He definitely did sound that drum.
Yes.
And you know, I was hearing also today someone who helped write his famous speech, his I Have a Dream speech, and how some of that came together. And you know, those words resonate today. I mean, how often have they been quoted? Have they been resounding, you know?
You know, and there's much of it has been written about that speech. It was supposed to be a 4 to 5 minute speech. It turned out to be 16 minutes, and he was ad-libbing. That part about I have a dream where my children and, you know, will meet with the white children, the black, that was ad-lib. That's nowhere in the original speech.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's look back 50 years, okay? Or let's look forward,
uh-huh.
where we are right now. And, you know, of late we've heard a lot about the Trayvon Martin case and how that just sort of stirred the pot, which is befitting as we come to this anniversary. But it also shed light on how far we haven't come.
Mm-hmm. You know, without a doubt, we have come a long way. 50 years ago, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. We wouldn't have a black president. So absolutely, things have changed. But we have so much more that we need to do. The Supreme Court just I guess, took some of the power out of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which left room for a lot of the states, such as North Carolina and Texas, to put in laws that will limit suffrage for a lot of not only African Americans, but a lot of poor people, a lot of immigrants. And so we're still wrestling with basic rights, the right to vote. We also have problems with the incidence of hate crimes. Hate crimes has gone up 67% since the year 2000. 67%. And that number increased even more when Barack Obama became president. So we still have some of those old ideas out there, you know. So, and the gap between rich and poor is getting larger and larger. And so we still have a long way to go to talk about social justice.
You know, we talked about working toward a colorless society where it doesn't have to be a black president, an Asian president, an Indian president. Really, will we ever get to that place?
But you know, I'm not sure that we want to get to that place. There is so much history and so much struggle that has gone into the fight for political, economic, social equality that when an Asian American or an African American or a woman becomes the president or the first, you want to be able to celebrate that. What we don't want, though, is that to be the only defining characteristic about you. If we could get back to what Martin Luther King said, that needs to be about the quality of your character. And if we can get to that point, we can still celebrate that this is the first for this social group.
So as we reflect this 50 years later, the historic March on Washington, D.C., the historic speech, the I Have a Dream speech, what do you think Martin Luther King would say as he looks down upon this reminiscence?
Mm-hmm. There's no doubt that he absolutely would be pleased, because we are, I think, living his dream. But it doesn't mean that we have to stop dreaming, that he would want us to go further, that there are others that need to be included in his dream, that we've gone a long way with the black and the white, but now we have Hispanics, we have religious, we have gay and lesbian rights, so there are all others that need to be included in this dream.
And so you're optimistic?
Well, I'm optimistic, of course I am, because in 50 years, look where we've come. I can't wait till my next 50.
There you go, and happy belated birthday.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We've been talking with Dr. Sandra Ardrey, who is the head of Western Kentucky University's Political Science Department. We've been remembering the historic March on Washington, D.C. as it celebrates 50 years, and our thanks to our drug policy individuals who joined us earlier in the show. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. Until next time, I'm Barbara Deeb. Thanks for joining us.